Hey PMC fans, it's your friend Choice CJ here, and I am back with the next installment in Momentum Shifters, this time for the Week 3 battles in the PMC. We had a good installment last week. In case you missed it, I'll quickly go over what the Momentum Shifters series is all about. Basically, we're going to be analyzing the games from this past week. We're going to look at all 6 games that were played, and we're going to pick a moment in the match where the outcome was dramatically affected based on the decisions that the players made. Maybe an important wall was taken down and it cleared a path for another Pokemon to win, or just some other factor just really changed the outcome of the game. And it's similar to top plays, but I think we're going to be focusing a little bit more when we can on like the subtler details. It's not going to be as much about the flashiest plays all the time. It's going to be, just kind of subtle and surgical moves that made a new or satisfied a new win condition, made a new win condition clear for a particular team in a particular match. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at our first match. This match was between the Tampa Bay Frogadiers and the Dallas Manetrics. This was a pretty anticipated match. Two teams that were undefeated coming into this week squared off, and there were some good moments in this game. A Spirit Tomb was able to trap a Jirachi. You take advantage of some mind games to land a pursuit when the Manetrics were expecting a Sucker Punch and stuff like that. There was an Emboar that looked to be pretty scary. It had gotten off to +1 Flame Charge, and Manetric came in, but unfortunately the Emboar couldn't outspeed the Manetric, so the Manetric got off a big hit with a Volt Switch, hindering the Emboar's ability to do damage. But I think when most people watched this match, the moment that really stood out to them was when the Manetrics brought in the Gourgeist on the Tyrantrum. The Gourgeist ended up being quite a thorn in the side of the Frogadiers. After taking a heads match pretty well from the Tyrantrum, the Gourgeist retaliates with a Will-O-Wisp. The Tyrantrum is going to just go for Stealth Rocks after that, which gives a nice opportunity for the Manetrics and their Gourgeist to heal back up to full health with a Synthesis. After that, the Spiritomb comes in and takes a good bit of damage from Seed Bomb, and on the next turn proceeds to die to a Shadow Sneak, revealing the Rocky Helmet, of course. So getting that little bit of damage off was going to be pretty important, or at least the Frogadiers thought. The Frogadiers brought in their monster, Kyurem Black, aka Brock Lesnar, a nickname that I do appreciate quite a bit. I hope I'm not the only one. And the Kyurem thinks it's going to get a really easy kill with an Ice Beam. But it turns out that the Gourgeist is Yachi Berry, and it's debatable whether this was a roll or not. You could say, it could have very easily killed the Gourgeist with a different roll, but needless to say, the Kyurem does not land the kill. The Gourgeist lives with 3 HP, and the Gourgeist is able to land a Will-O-Wisp on the Kyurem. Now, this is a pretty big deal. The Manetrics have a pretty fearsome duo in the back, in Manetric and in their own Kyurem. It's a Choice Scarf Kyurem. The Frogadiers were going to have a pretty tough time dealing with that combination as it was, just because they were so fast and they hit so hard. Kyurem's bulk isn't great, but I bet if it was at a better amount of HP, it could have lived maybe 1 hit, and retaliated back with a KO. It maybe not, who knows, but needless to say, with it being whittled by the Will-O-Wisp damage, it really decreased the probability of that Kyurem living. The Frogadiers try to go into Granbull afterwards and get off a Heal Bell to try and take that poison condition away, and also heal up the poison the burn condition on the Kyurem Black, and the burned condition on the Tyrantrum as well. But then you have to switch both of those Mons back into Stealth Rocks again, and at the end of the day, it was just kind of the writing on the wall for the Frogadiers. So, nice play by the Manetrics. anticipating that encounter and taking out, or at least crippling, a huge threat on the Frogadier side. Next up, I want to talk about the match between the Kansas City King Dres and the Chicago Cub Chews. Now, in this match, there was a kind of an interesting moment, I would say, when the Zygarde came in and it was facing down a Reuniclus, and the Zygarde was actually a Dragon Dance Life Orb set, which is pretty fearsome. And it looked like the Reuniclus set this week was not like a physically defensive set. It was some kind of regenerator set, maybe with Assault Vest, something of that nature. In any case, it didn't seem like it had a lot of defense investment. So, anticipating a strong physical move from the Zygarde, the Reuniclus swaps out into Tentacruel and looks at this Zygarde going for a Dragon Dance, and that's pretty scary. And when you have a Zygarde in against a Tentacruel and you're at +1 attack and +1 speed, your gut instinct is to go for Earthquake. 9 times out of 10, that's a really good move. But I suppose that this was a move that was anticipated as well. The Cub Chews foresaw this encounter coming and decided to pack a Shucaberry on the Tentacruel. And the reason that this ended up being a big deal was because the Tentacruel ends up living on a very, very small amount of HP from this Earthquake and is able to retaliate with an Icy Wind. The fact that the Icy Wind got off is almost more important than the Tentacruel living, because it brought the speed deck back down to 0, and it allowed the Cub Chews to bring in their Nidoking and threaten out this Zygarde. If the Zygarde hadn't been stopped right there, I'm pretty sure it would have cleaned up the rest of the Cub Chews team. It was a pretty tough play. What makes it more tough is when you go and look at the damage calcs. Even on a bold-natured Tentacruel with nearly max defense investment, there's a good chance that Outrage actually kills the Tentacruel. It's not to say that Outrage would have been the better play. I would have clicked Earthquake there. I think all of us would have clicked Earthquake there. But it just makes it that much more bitter. And just makes it all the more amazing that this was the momentum shifting point in the match. Without this move on the part of the Cub Chews, I think it's fair to say they would have lost. I don't think there would have been a response that they could have gone for that would have taken out this Zygarde. So nice play. Way to stop a really scary sweeper. I think that's pretty nice. Let's move on to the next game. And this was between the Misty Drapions and the Hampton Hydreigons. So this is kind of an interesting play. It wasn't, I guess, the most notable play from the game, but I think that the way that these series of plays went down, it set up conditions for the Hydreigons to take this game. The Electivire was in against the Hydreigons, and the Hydreigons swapped into their Cofagrigus, anticipating a Brick Break. They did have a Miltank in, and they were able, obviously, to not take any damage from the Brick Break, being a Ghost type, and they get a chance to go for a Will-O-Wisp. And the Drapions swap out of their Electivire and go into Goodra, and Goodra takes the burn. Now, it's not a huge deal on the surface of it. Goodra isn't a really... It can be a physical attacker, but in this game it wasn't, so it wasn't a huge deal. The burn does power up the Hex coming out of the Cofagrigus, but Cofagrigus wasn't specially special attack invested, and Goodra is obviously really bulky on the special side. But after a couple of hits, it's able to get some good damage. The Hydreigons afterwards are going to try and bring in their Mega Altaria and go for a Dragon Dance, and facing down this Goodra, anticipating that the Goodra's not really going to be able to do any damage to it. Turns out Goodra's packing Ice Beam, and is able to land a nice hit. But the Hydreigons are excited. They have a +1 Altaria, and don't really see many counters for it on the Drapion's team. However, small miscalculation was made on the part of the Hydreigons. The Altaria was actually 0 happiness and was running return. So it went for a +1 pixelated boosted return, and it did practically nothing to this Goodra. So the reason that I say that the burn and the ensuing hex hits were such a big deal was that if this Altaria, you know, being what it was, not having the right happiness for its moveset, if it got killed by Goodra without having any damage done to it, the Hydreigons might have had a hard time dealing with it. They did have Mamoswine in the back, which can do some good work to it, but it was poisoned. The Drapions could have swapped out and it kind of, you know, just stalled down the Mamoswine a bit. And then the other Pokemon that was really left for the Hydreigons was Thundurus T, but Thundurus T, even with a super effective hit and Power Ice, is not going to be able to do a tremendous amount of damage to Goodra, and it was at such low health that the Goodra could have easily killed with pretty much any move. Dragon Pulse, Ice Beam, you name it. It doesn't matter. So if you think about it, the fact that the Goodra ended up being so weak was a really important moment in the match. If it hadn't turned out that way, then we would have seen the fail sweep from Altaria, and we might have seen a loss from the Hydreigons, to be honest. So, little did we know that that ended up being so important, but I just wanted to point that out, that ended up being really crucial, because Goodra could have been a really scary Pokemon otherwise. Next up, I want to talk about the match between the Pittsburgh Steelix and the Chicago Sacred Fire. Now, this was a pretty remarkable game. If you haven't had a chance to go watch it, I definitely recommend it. There was a moment in this match where the Steelix switched in their Umbreon, and the Sacred Fire had out a Salamence. And it was obvious that the Salamence couldn't really do anything to the Umbreon because it had Wish and it had Foul Play, and while the Salamence had Toxic, it didn't want to take the Synchronize and end up being Toxic itself. So the Sacred Fire made a good play and went into their Mega Lopunny, which, 9 times out of 10 is going to threaten out the Umbreon. So knowing this, and knowing that the Steelix have a Landorus T on their team, they make a what I would say is a good prediction, an aggressive prediction, and go for Ice Punch on the Umbreon. And the Umbreon actually stays in. They don't go into Landorus T. The Umbreon stays in, even in the face of a looming high jump kick, and gets off a Foul Play on the Lopunny. Of course, the Sacred Fire at this point, they couldn't know that the Umbreon was actually holding a Chople Berry, and so there wasn't as much of a risk leaving in the Umbreon. Getting that damage is really nice on the Lopunny. And now the Umbreon, it must switch out at this point, you figure, right? Now it doesn't have a Wish coming up to heal itself back up. The Lopunny made an over-prediction the first time. Not going to make an over-prediction the second time, right? Well, the Umbreon stays in again and takes an Ice Punch yet again from the Lopunny. And Umbreon retaliates with Foul Play. So now the Lopunny is in the red, or at least nearly in the red. And I'm sure the Sacred Fire are kicking themselves, trying to make some sense of what the Steelix are doing. They're getting outplayed, it seems like. And they say, okay, this is enough. I'm just going to click High Jump Kick. It's obvious that the Steelix are not switching out. So they go for the High Jump Kick, and the Umbreon shows the Chople Berry. And the Chople Berry pops, and the Umbreon gets off a final Foul Play to kill it off the Lopunny. Now, in addition to just to being a very intense series of plays, this was a pretty critical moment of the match, because the Lopunny was the only thing with priority, to my knowledge anyway, that the Sacred Fire had on their team, at least if they had left. and the Steelix brought their quiver dancing Vivillon this week, and was able to get up to a good amount of speed, and it was taking advantage of some sleep powder and substitute and things of that nature. If the Lopunny hadn't gone down, the Lopunny could come in, go for Fake Out, break a sub, and if it was at like 40% HP or less and didn't have a sub up, the Fake Out would have killed. So the fact that Lopunny was down meant that there wasn't a really fantastic check remaining on the Sacred Fire side for this Vivillon. So the fact that Lopunny went down just really cleared the path for the win condition coming from the Steelix's side. So that's why I think this is the momentum shifting point of the match, because without Lopunny, the Sacred Fire just didn't have an answer for that Vivillon anymore. Next up, we're going to look at the Colorado Rapidash and the Sydney Crocodiles. Now, I'll preface this by saying there was a huge moment at the end of the match where the Crocodiles had a huge monster on their side of the field. They had a +6/+6 Mega Sableye up against the Rapidash. Rapidash had 3 Pokemon left, and it was looking really scary. So the Rapidash sack a Pokemon, go into Weavile, go for an Icicle Crash, and the Icicle Crash lands a flinch. And the Icicle Crash is a 2-hit KO on the Sableye. Obviously, that was a huge momentum shifting point, but it wouldn't really be all that fun to talk about just that move. So I picked something a little different. I picked a play where Diggersby comes in on the Rapidash's side. The Crocodiles make a good play. They switch out their Tyranitar while facing down this Diggersby, anticipating the Earthquake, and they go into their Cryogonal, which has, of course, Levitate ability, and is able to dodge an Earthquake. Now, Cryogonal is pretty naturally speedy. I think it has something like base 105 or base 110 speed. But this particular Cryogonal was not speed invested, and the Diggersby, I believe, was max speed Jolly. And because of that, it was actually able to outspeed the Cryogonal, who goes for a return, and Cryogonal has paper-thin physical defense, and immediately goes down. The real big play here is what happens afterwards. The Crocodiles go into their Talonflame, which is obviously a huge threat. Can go for that Brave Bird, it's going to hit any Pokemon hard. The Rapidash, however, decide to leave their Diggersby in on this Talonflame. They proceed to take a Brave Bird, and they live on just the slightest amount of HP. They live with enough HP to go for another hit and survive, or, you know, take the Life Orb recoil, and they'll die immediately afterwards. But they go for Stone Edge. And Stone Edge, as you can imagine, from a huge powered Diggersby, is a clean Oko on that Talonflame. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Return was an Oko. But anyway, it was the Stone Edge that was chosen, and it was the Stone Edge that obliterated this Talonflame. If the Crocodiles had been able to keep their Talonflame, if it had landed the KO on the Diggersby and not taken a Stone Edge in return, that would have been a pretty remarkable change in the outcome of the match. As I said, the Weavile was a Pokemon that pretty much saved the game for the Rapidash. If they hadn't gotten that flinch off, the Sableye would have ended up cleaning up their team. But if you just imagine for a moment that the Crocodiles had that Talonflame in the back, not saying any mistakes were made, of course. Brave Bird is 100% what I'm clicking in that situation. But if you imagine that that they had a Talonflame in the back, it can come in after that Sableye goes down and go for a Brave Bird and potentially save that game. So the fact that the Rapidash were able to eliminate a huge threat in that fashion was a maybe unexpected, kind of an unexpected way of getting that Weavile the win. They still needed a 30% flinch chance to get the win at the end of the day, but even if that Talonflame was around, even if they did hit that 30% chance, then I think it would have been game over for the Rapidash, and the match would have gone convincingly to the Crocodiles. Now I want to talk about what I think is our last match of the week. Pretty sure. We're going to talk about the Jersey Dwebbles and the Cleveland Escavaliers. This was a pretty good game, a pretty good showing from the Jersey Dwebbles. They had a situation where they brought in their Heatran, staring down a Golurk. They were wondering if the Golurk was maybe Assault Vested, but they go for Dark Pulse, and it turns out that the Golurk is one-hit KO'd by Dark Pulse. Which is obviously great for them, obviously crappy for the Escavaliers. The Escavaliers come in with their Gardevoir and Mega Evolve. I was anticipating that the Gardevoir would go for the Focus Blast, which would be doing a pretty tremendous amount of damage to Heatran. Instead, the Escavaliers click Shadow Ball, and they also take a Dark Pulse with their Gardevoir, and that's a 2-hit KO on the Gardevoir at the range of HP that it's at. Escavaliers go for another Shadow Ball, and Heatran lives it and goes for yet another Dark Pulse and KOs the Gardevoir. And then, as if that wasn't enough, the Escavaliers follow that up by switching in their Avalugg. Avalugg, from what I understand, wanted to go for Recover, but Heatran once again clicked for Dark Pulse, and this time the Heatran actually lands a flinch on the Avalugg, and it's within, it's got less than 25% HP at this point. Avalugg's easily killed again by another Dark Pulse. Now, the reason that this is such a huge deal is because the Dwebbles are packing a Dragonite in the back with Dragon Dance and moves like Earthquake and presumably either Dragon Claw or Outrage or something like that. At the end of the day, the Dragonite might still have ended up sweeping the team, but Golurk, Gardevoir, and the Avalugg all could have been potential checks to that Dragonite, especially Avalugg. The Avalugg probably could have taken a +1 Earthquake or a +1 Dragon Claw, I'm almost positive, and it could retaliate with some sort of move like Avalanche. So the fact that the Avalugg had to go down to that Heatran, it was pretty tough for the Escavaliers. They might not have had a path to victory anyway, but without that Avalugg, they really stood no chance against the Dragonite. And Dragonite's one of my favorite Pokemon. It was cool to see that Dragonite sweep. So I'm glad that that's sorry fandom base, but it was cool to see those series of plays unfold and create circumstances in which Dragonite could sweep. So that was really great. So with all of that, of course, that is week 3, and I want to thank you guys for watching. I do recommend that you guys subscribe to the PMC channel. I'll be doing this again next week, of course, and you guys can check in and watch us analyze the week's games. And while you're browsing around on YouTube, if you want to check me out, I'd be pleased if you did so. You can find me at ChoiceCJ, and you can also find me on Twitter at ChoiceCJ. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Check back to this channel and tune into my channel if you'd like for additional Pokemon content. And until the next time, I will see you all later.